right, good afternoon, manufacturing world. This is Wade Anderson, your host of Shop Matters, sponsored by Okuma America, coming to you once again this afternoon live from IMTS 2022. So this is something new for us, coming an opportunity to record here in the IMTS booth. So joining me here today, I've got Rocky Helms from RCR, Richard Childress Racing. Welcome, Rocky.
Welcome, Wade. Glad to be here.
All right, so Rocky's one of my favorite guys I get to work with and talk to over the years. I got to know Rocky for several years now from the Okuma and RCR relationship. So Rocky, everybody that is into high horsepower, race cars, cool engines, manufacturing, machining, they got to believe that you've got probably the coolest job in the world. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your job title is and what you do?
My name's Rocky Helms, and I'm the Vice President of Manufacturing for Richard Childress Racing. They probably think it's a pretty cool job until they do it for a little while. It's not all it's cut out to be for the most part. Honestly, it's pretty good. Been doing it for 28 years total, and all 28 of those years have been in NASCAR, in manufacturing, in some form or fashion. 23 of them have been at Richard Childress Racing. Started as a machinist, machined for many years. Starting out in high school, 17 years old, worked at several machine shops in different industries, and then kind of worked my way into RCR, worked my way from machinist up to programming, and then into the engineering department, ran our prototype department for about 4 or 5 years, then moved into overseeing all of our manufacturing from the machining side, and was moved to VP back beginning of this year.
That's impressive. That's quite a resume and a work history you've got. So very cool. So most recently, I guess the most recent addition to RCR from an Okuma standpoint has been the Multus with the Armroid, correct? So we've got that machine at the front of the booth as you first enter, running the single piece lug nut. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with that and using the Armroid both in production, but also maybe running it manually as a standalone?
So going back a little bit, a couple years when we found out that NASCAR was going to be doing basically what they call the next gen car, that was going to change basically manufacturing for all of NASCAR. Previously, you could design your own parts, manufacture your own parts. That was kind of a headache in a lot of ways because it changed every day. Monday, you come in and you're told, we need these new parts for this weekend. So you go to work designing, manufacturing, testing the best you can in 3 or 4 days and going to the racetrack. So NASCAR was trying to keep it from turning into Formula One where the costs were getting astronomical. When I started at RCR, we had 2 machines and 2 machinists. And now we're up to 21 machines, 2 shifts, 34 people. So we were manufacturing everything that you possibly could in-house, everything on the engine side, everything on the car side. We brought chassis manufacturing in-house, a lot of engine parts that we used to not produce in-house. So long story short, the costs were going up astronomically. So NASCAR, with some input from owners, we're trying to keep those costs down. One of the solutions was kind of going to a common car where there were single source suppliers for those parts. There were going to be some parts we could still manufacture in-house, but the biggest majority, suspension components, the chassis itself, everyone would have the same parts and pieces. It's just, then it come down to crew chief, driver, race engineer, simulation, and how you make those parts work. So we actually were contracted by NASCAR to manufacture the very first next gen car. Going back to what you said earlier about having the best job, this was where it got really, really, really stressful. NASCAR came to us, Delara, an overseas company, they had developed the car working with NASCAR, and we were contracted to manufacture and test the first car. So from the very beginning that we were told about the car, we had exactly 8 weeks, 2 months to go and build an entire car from the ground up, something totally different, independent rear suspension, all the front end was different, transaxle, totally different car than what we were accustomed to. So we had to start right away manufacturing fixtures to build the chassis, manufacturing billet, upper and lower control arms, all the billet machine parts. This chassis had a tremendous amount of billet parts on this chassis. compared to the previous version, was more fabricated parts. This one had more billet. Front and rear clip were separate entities, so they bolted on and off. So we had about 4 weeks to do the chassis, and then the last 4 weeks were spent doing all the rest of the car. We went to Richmond, done the first test, and then we built what they called V2, version 2. Went to some other tests, and then COVID kind of hit and kind of put the rollout of the car 1 year later than what NASCAR originally intended. Was kind of a good thing in a way, because it gave us an extra year to develop the car. It definitely was actually a blessing in disguise. From our standpoint, back to your original question, there were going to be vendors for every component, and those were going to go out for bid to different companies. So we put our name in the hat to bid on some of the parts. One of the ones that we won was the single lug nut, which was honestly probably the most talked about part that you could possibly get, the most scrutinized. Every single week that there's a race, the lug nut was talked about. So we won that contract. So we supply the single lug nut for all the race teams that run the Cup Series. So it was going to be one of the very first bigger production type jobs that we had done. Up to that point, we're making one part. 10, 20, 30 was a big run for us. With the lug nut, we didn't know exactly what the consumption was going to be, how many teams are going to change every race, how many are going to change every 3 or 4 races. So we knew we were going to have to kind of get into the automation side more than what we had. So we got with Okuma, and actually the Armroid machine was something brand new that had been developed, and it looked like it was going to be a really good mix for what we were going to be trying to accomplish. So working with Okuma, we got that machine in, got introduced to automation and robotics, which was something we had never had. You know, we'd never had any robots in the shop. Got trained up on it actually really quick, and then with Akuma's help, Kevin Kraske and all the AEs, Chris Davala, all of those guys at Okuma helped us get that thing up and going and producing a finished part. We originally quoted to NASCAR thinking consumption was 800 to 1,200 wheel nuts per year. We still have 8 races left, and we're over 3,000 that we've had to produce. Some teams are changing them out every week. They're changing them out pit stop practice quite a bit. There were some changes that it's going through right now. We made some prototypes for NASCAR that may or may not come out here in the next few weeks or whatever. But yeah, that was our introduction to the automation side, was with the Armroid.
That's incredible, and that's quite a history that you've gone through. So the way that you run production, there's times, depending on the speed of what you need to do, you can actually break that system up, correct? So you'll do the parts complete on the machine, doing op 10, op 20, all the milling, or depending on the speed that you need to go through, sometimes you'll break it up, do turning, and then kick it over to the 5-axis mill and separate it out to get faster throughput.
Yeah, exactly. That was one thing nice about it. We wanted the option to either run the complete part, lights out on the Armroid, or depending on if an order there's 40 race teams. So if all 40 teams ordered a set on Monday morning, that's 160 wheel nuts we have to have produced, within a few days, as fast as we possibly can. We don't want to get too far ahead, because anybody that's been involved with NASCAR knows they can change their mind the next day, and then everything you have in inventory is scrap. So we didn't want too much inventory, but we wanted to be able to produce them with several different options. One is, as Wade said, we can run lights out, complete part, op 10, op 20, finished part, and or we can do all the lathe work, still op 10 and 20, transfer to the sub, and then we can do the 5-axis milling on the Okuma 5-axis machine if we need the throughput a little bit quicker.
That's incredible. So let's shift gears a little bit, and enough of the machining talk. Talk about some exciting news going on with RCR. I know you guys had an announcement this morning.
Yeah, so timing was pretty much perfect for this discussion.
Yeah.
If anybody follows NASCAR, they obviously know that Kyle Busch has been in the news quite a bit in the last couple months. And effective this morning, officially at 10 o'clock, Kyle Busch will now be driving the number 8 RCR Chevrolet Camaro Z01. Still the same sponsors that we had previously. And we don't know exactly car number and stuff, but the talk is still Tyler Reddick will be driving a third chartered car that we will have. There's been talk of possibly the 29 number coming back and being his number. Speculation is obviously he's going to 2311 racing at the end of next year, but we also have Austin Hill that drives the Xfinity car for us at 21. He's ran one cup race, has a couple more scheduled, so there's a possibility of him probably moving to that car at the end of next year.
Now, does that affect anything that goes on in the shop from a manufacturing standpoint, adding that third car?
Yeah, definitely. Adding a third car is from the engine side. So we supply chassis and race car components for ourselves on the Xfinity side. So we still run Xfinity cars. They still run the old car just like they always have. And we have our own 2 cars, and then we have multiple affiliates that we have to supply. Colleague Racing, Big Machine Records, or several different teams that we supply chassis and engines. But on the Cup side, we still supply engine components to our engine shop. So with the addition of a third car, that'll be a 33% increase in the Cup engines that we have to produce internally. And then we also produce Colleague Racing's 2 Cup cars. Petty GMS Racing has 2 cars. We provide their engines. So right now we do 350 roughly complete engines in a year. That'll definitely increase next year.
So you spent a couple of days walking around the booth, walking around IMTS. Any cool technologies that have stood out to you so far?
Definitely the automation side. Everyone knows what a struggle it is with finding employees and stuff like that, and retaining employees. So even though we're a small manufacturer in terms of production and volume, yeah, the wheel nuts a few thousand, but to most of the manufacturers here, 3,000 is still not a huge quantity. They're tens of thousands. But as we venture more into medium to low production, the automation side, and obviously Okuma has a tremendous presence in that atmosphere here at IMTS 2022. So been looking at some of that stuff. The Standroid, that's another option that we have some benefits for in our shop with some of the type parts that we have to produce.
Sure. I think you mentioned something earlier when you wanted to get into automation, but you didn't have that experience, you didn't have programmers on staff. That to me is really the main talking point for these Roid series of automation. The Standroid and the Armroid, that is an OEM integrated system, but it's using our collision avoidance software. So you don't have to program it. It's a self-teaching robot. It's looking at the collision avoidance software and where it needs to load the part, and then it's finding its own path in and out of the machine. I think that's one of the most amazing pieces of technology I've seen in a while.
Yeah, that was honestly the biggest selling point to us with it and venturing into automation. I've wanted a robot, some type of automation for a while. And again, it's scary at first if you've never done it, and our quantities were so small. Putting something standard in front of a machine that you got to bolt to the floor and spend days or weeks figuring it all out and programming it to make 200 or 300 parts really just didn't make sense for us. But in this sense, we honestly, believe it or not, we took our least experienced guy. He was actually a spotter on the car side for 20 plus years. He was Kevin Harvick's spotter. He'd been at RCR for a long time, wanted to get off the road. So he decided, he came to me, he's like, hey, I like to manufacture and I'd like to move down to Okuma. And so we moved him down, and that's what everybody calls our shop. Obviously, it's RCR Manufacturing, but the entire complex at RCR calls it Okuma because all the Okuma machines. So he decided he wanted to move down to our facility, and we put him on a lathe, no experience whatsoever. He's been doing it about a little over 2 years, and caught on really quick, really sharp guy. So when we got the Armroid in, I had him and one of my other machinists / programmers trained on it. And actually, Billy O'Day, that's his name, he's actually the guy that handles all the stuff with the Armroid. When we switch over things, he's the one that sets it up. He's the one that keeps tabs on it, checks parts coming off. He's the one that helped with programming it. And actually, like I said, our least experienced lathe guy is the one that handles everything related to the Armroid machine.
That's incredible. So the last thing I'm going to ask, and we'll wrap this up, but I heard a little buzz through the rumor mill that they're going to be running a road race in Chicago next year. Is that right?
Yeah. So next year, 2023, July 1st and 2nd, I believe is the date. They're going to run a road course here, and we actually, it was kind of funny. We took a cab over, and the cab driver is a lady, and we asked her if she knew anything about it. And of course, she didn't, and we were actually on one of the streets, so we looked up the map, and we were actually on the street, and she kind of mapped out we had her making the left and the right, and we followed the road course. But the funny part was she was familiar with NASCAR, but her first words were, "Oh my God, I'm going to make sure I'm in France that week." She was terrified that there was going to be a NASCAR race here and how crazy it was going to be. But anyway, it was. So we actually mapped out and followed the course of what it's going to follow. There's a couple of turns that are going to be pretty interesting.
Oh, that's great. Rocky, I always enjoyed talking to you. Great having you here. Appreciate you joining me here in the booth, and look forward to spending some time with you here at IMTS.
Okay.
All
Appreciate
right.
it. Thanks
for everybody joining us. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.